Good morning to those tuning in from the United States. Good afternoon to those joining us from Europe. My name is Jörn Fleck. I'm the Senior Director of the Europe Center here at the Atlantic Council, and it is my pleasure and honor to welcome you to today's conversation with Her Excellency Marta Kos, Commissioner at the European Commission for Enlargement. A warm welcome, Commissioner.
Thank you so much. It's really great to be back to Washington. I have done my part of studies here through the university in Ljubljana. So I studied here in this city. I loved it at that time. So every time it's so great to come back. Thank you for having me here.
Great to have you back. Obviously, you need a little introduction. You've led the enlargement portfolio. You're the first Commissioner for Enlargement, strictly speaking, in the title since December of 2024. And so your portfolio covers enlargement policy in Brussels, the accession process of prospective new members to the European Union, and there's obviously lots of dynamic developments there. I should just note that this is part of the Atlantic Council's IMF Week programming on the occasion of the spring meetings of the IMF and World Bank. We're also delighted at the Europe Center to host this as part of our Balkans Forward initiative that tries to keep the Western Balkans on the agenda here in Washington, D.C., and tries to chart a forward-looking agenda for the region. Nice. So let's dive right in. Commissioner Kos, you've spoken about how successful a geopolitical and geoeconomic tool enlargement has been historically for the European Union, but also for the continent writ large. And still, it might not be obvious to the audience here why an enlargement commissioner goes to the IMF and World Bank spring meetings. So can you talk a little bit about, kick us off, set the scene, about your priorities for your visit? And also contextualize the importance of EU enlargement for the Union and for European stability and security.
Yes, indeed. Yesterday I got the questions from one of the journalists. There are many reasons why I am here during the spring session of the IMF and World Bank. The first reason is that the accession process or negotiations with the countries, sometimes we really cannot do our work without the international financial institutions. So they play a very important role, especially the IMF. We have signed the agreement yesterday. I did this with Kristalina Georgieva on our contribution to the newly established Southeastern Technical Center helping Western Balkan countries and Moldova. And I'm very happy that, sometimes the reforms we demand from our applicants are the same actually IMF wants them to do, especially on the field of the governance, taxation, banking system, and of course from our side, very important, the anti-corruption. The second reason is I wanted to discuss with many interlocutors from the United States how actually the enlargement process is built up to better understand why the enlargement is also a big and huge opportunity for U.S. businesses. Namely, if we go to the past, and I know that many ambassadors are here, it's great to have you here and interact with you, is that actually the accession process is built on the system that we help the candidates to go through the transformation of the economy and society, building up the economy, meaning they have to do the reforms, sometimes not that easy. Only if the reforms are done also, especially on the field of anti-corruption, the investors will come. Meaning that through these reforms we are building up somehow legal certainties for private investors to come. It's impossible, let's speak about the Ukraine. It will not be possible that only with the taxpayers' money we do the reconstruction of this country. So we would need private money. And of course, then once the private investors are coming, it is easier to take care about the prosperity. And the third reason I'm here is also speaking about Ukraine. There is so much going on. in this country. It is for the first time that that we are negotiating with a country which is at war, and this country is still delivering more than some other candidate countries which live in peaceful times. It's interesting.
Thank you for setting out those priorities. I want to dive into all of them if we can. And I do want to get to the Western Balkans, but obviously you already mentioned Ukraine is top of mind for many people. You yourself have said or expressed, I think, to media the hope that you can open all accession chapters very soon, that you can release funding in order to recognize Ukraine's progress under the Ukraine facility, its own reforms making progress. Can you give us a little bit of an update on that front?
So you want me to speak about Hungary or the elections there?
That's too. Maybe that's part two of the question is, we saw the election result. We'll have the end of the blockage, hopefully, at the EU table from Viktor Orban under new TISA-led government. How does that change your portfolio, especially with regards to Ukraine?
You know, I'm very happy to speak about this because during the last year, it was sometimes painful that we as the European Union couldn't deliver what actually is normal in the accession process because we have been blocked. And, you know, one of the member states who has given a green light to a country to become a candidate, otherwise this country, speaking about Ukraine, it will not be possible, but then we couldn't go on, so we have been able to do the technical work but not officially open the so-called clusters, which are needed that we can go on with the technical part of the negotiations. So that's why I expect now that we will soon be able to do this for Ukraine and Moldova. So the technical work is going on, but you know, just to explain, the accession process is one part, is the technical one, I'm responsible. The other has to do with the dynamic in the member states. And, you know, we have to follow also the interests of the member states, of their concerns. So I'm not that negative towards how one of the member states has behaved. It is only what I expect from every member state is when we get a decision on the level of the leaders, like for the 90 billion loan, then we should implement this. So yes, I do expect, and Ukrainians especially, they need money, you know, to defend their country, to work normally, that we will be able to release 90 billion loan. This is for the years 26 and 27. We are in the negotiations for the new MFF with another big part for money for Ukraine. And of course, this will bring a new dynamic in the whole accession process. But if I go back to the beginning of your question, you know, why I'm saying that I have the best job possible being Commissioner for Enlargement, because enlargement is really the priority. We have done now in a year and a half more than before in 15 years. Can you imagine? It's not because I'm Commissioner. I hope I contribute to this, but it's because the member states have decided, and the European Commission, that this is priority. I agree we have been pushed, you know, through the war in Ukraine, but when I say that enlargement today is much more than the enlargement, it is how can we, through the enlargement as the best possible foreign policy of the European Union, answer to the challenges we have today. And the challenges are what? We are confronted with our adversaries who would like to ruin the EU. We have been pressured from the East, from the West, from the other parts also. So enlargement is just one part of this, but very much important. And this geopolitics has caused us to go more in the security angle. I don't think that ever before enlargement or the accession process has been so much about security. Namely, if we will not take care about our candidates or our neighborhood, I'm also responsible for the Eastern Partnership countries like Armenia, Azerbaijan, Belarus, then somebody else will jump in and weaponize them against us. That's why, you know, I'm so passionate about what I have to do in my job, and I love to do in my job, because this is really more and more. And now with the results of the elections in Hungary, we can give back to Ukraine what actually we promised but we couldn't deliver.
Well, I think it is fair to say you've brought a new passion, energy, and attention
Thank
to
you.
this process at the EU level, even if then there's also the broader geopolitical impetus that we've seen, especially since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. Coming back to that point a little bit, you've, at the same time, as you've said, this is this geopolitical moment that Europe must meet. There's a security imperative, a strategic imperative. You've also tried to manage expectations, because this is a very demanding process for candidates and the EU in many ways. How do you get that balance right when it comes to Ukraine, especially, of meeting that geopolitical moment, at the same time not raising unrealistic expectations and not watering down what you, the Commission President, and others have insisted is a merit-based process with real reforms, from rule of law to anti-corruption to many other economic reforms in many other areas?
No accession process or enlargement can happen against the will of our member states. And this is good so. So we have to take into the considerations what are the concerns of our member states. And we've done a survey, so we know that the concerns are how the new members will affect our decision-making process, how we will be able to finance this, how will this, especially because of, let's say, very strong Ukrainian agriculture, you've been speaking about Ukraine, how will this affect the farmers in the European Union? So I think that those concerns are good, and we have to deal with this, but we also have to explain what enlargement today means and how it works. It doesn't work in the sense that all the candidates will become a member next year. So this is not possible. I don't know if somebody from Sweden is here, but Sweden was the most prepared country when we started to negotiate, but even Sweden needed 3 years. Because we have to be sure that the country will be ready to cope being a part of the, let's say, common market, or that the country will follow the rule of law or the obligations deriving out of the membership. And to this extent, we see that some mistakes have been done in the past. That's why there is also a new element in the accession process, and this is how we also answer to the concerns of the member states. One of the concerns is namely that once we have newcomers, they could ruin us from the inside. I was pretty heavily criticized last November when I, in one of the interviews, have mentioned for the first time the term Trojan horses, that we have to do everything to avoid that we will not have Trojan horses inside the European Union. And the consequences today are that the new accession treaties we are now preparing soon, hopefully for Montenegro, will have a special part with safeguards, meaning the safeguards, special procedures or actions that if new member states will follow what needs to be done, meaning follow the European Treaty, our values and so on, the safeguards will not be even felt. But if they will go against them, those safeguards will bite hard. So this is, let's say, one of the concerns. And of course, we are aware that in some countries, at the end of the accession process, they will have to have a referendum, or I'm speaking about France, so having a referendum or 3/5 majority in the parliament. So whatever we do in the accession process, we also have to take care that it will be able for the member states to confirm the new members coming to us.
Before I turn really to the Western Balkans, and I want to invite our audience online to submit their questions at askac.org. I'll try and get there towards the end, and also if anyone here in the room wants to jump in with a question, we'll try and fit that in towards the end. Last question here on the big picture. If there's no fast track and no cutting corners, as you have said, Ukraine is undergoing this process under extremely challenging, unique circumstance of being under, in wartime conditions. Many of the Western Balkans candidates have been at this for a decade or more. How do you keep this? How do you keep these countries engaged and the incentives and the momentum going when at the same time there's this challenge of the questions or doubts over the reliability, credibility of the process actually leading to success?
Very important point, the credibility. We are still nowadays in the accession process using methodology which we used when, let's say, Portugal and Spain 40 years back joined the EU. So this methodology is not made for the times we are living in. This methodology is made for peace. It is made for the times when there is enough time. So, just the time, how many years some country is a candidate doesn't say a lot, because we have countries which are candidates for a long time, but they didn't move, not just because of the European Union not being enlargement the priority, but because of themselves. But I agree with you, we have to be credible. So we go through the whole accession process. We would have to give more certainty to the candidates that if they fulfill all the criteria, they will be able to become a member of the EU, and the sooner the better, especially because of Ukraine. That's why we are now talking with the member states how we could make our methodology in the process more efficient. There are many possibilities. One of them is that we use more, enhance the gradual integration. For instance, we have good examples. We have third countries who are working with us very close, like the countries which are in the European Economic Area, like Norway, Iceland, Switzerland. They are not part of the decision-making process, but they can participate. So we are now talking to the member states. I hope that we will find a solution which will give more certainty and to us credibility of the success of the whole process.
If you had a magic wand, other than the safeguards and gradual integration, what are sort of the 2 or 3 things you would love to see change to make that process more effective and efficient?
I would love to see that we will use the qualified majority in the decision-making process more. This is also what our president has said. We need 2 unanimity decisions based on the European Treaty, but somehow during the years we have developed that we are using 150. So this is costly in time and energy and the engagement. So going more, not just keeping unanimity for the most important decisions, but in between using more QMV. Then what is also more important, bringing in the security issue. We have done a survey, and this is one of the reasons why the enlargement has gotten so much in the essence. How much do our citizens feel that Russia could also attack the other countries? It's very, very different result in Europe. 77% of people in Poland think that Russia could attack their country. And 70% of people in Italy say, come on, never, they will never attack us. So we have to deal with this. But under the line, the security issue has given a new push. So, going back to your question, I would like to all of us be able to explain more why enlargement today matters. It is not only about having as a EU, more square kilometers or more millions in the number of people. But really, can we, through the enlargement process, get more secure? And I think that this is one of the reasons that's why, this job is so interesting today.
Coming to the Western Balkans specifically, as I said, many of the candidate countries have been at it for decades. At the same time, we have two front runners, Montenegro, that hopes to close all of its chapters by the end of this year, and then Albania, that has expressed determination to close negotiations by the end of next year. How do you assess that progress? How realistic is this Montenegrin slogan of 28 by 28, so the 28th member by 2028? Give us your take.
Yeah. Usually we don't set the dates in the accession process because it really depends. It is merit-based, so it depends on how the countries are delivering. But of course, we support ambitious goals. First of Montenegro, it is possible that we will close, so it is possible that Montenegro with 650,000 people will become the 28th member of the EU. It is also possible for Albania to become the member until 2030 or even earlier. And then, of course, we are now, perhaps we will get a new candidate country. I'm very much looking forward. So Iceland will have a referendum at the end of August. And if their citizens will decide to come back to the accession process, this could be the fastest accession process ever, because Iceland is already a part of the common market, is already a part of the Schengen area, and to some extent, how they are European, I would say sometimes more than some of the already member states.
Wow. Quick, half jokingly, would a Montenegro-Iceland bundling package of accession make this more feasible in France, for example? Do you need a referendum?
Psychology or perception plays a big role also in the foreign policy. So I think that Iceland coming back could play a very positive role in this.
Okay. Our former chairman and former national security advisor in SACEUR, General Jim Jones, likes to say, vision without resourcing is hallucination. If we look we know there's a new multi-annual financial framework being discussed. That is the 7-year budget framework for the European Union starting in 2028. How hopeful are you that you can really find dedicated an envelope, so-called in Brussels lingo, for the Western Balkans and for enlargement specifically in that new MFF?
The negotiations are still going on, and we will see, how much money out of our proposal we will get, the European Commission. But, my team knows that I usually say the money is not the problem. The problem is if we spend the money smart. And this is where I have to then with my team take care of. So if it goes in the way what our expectations are or plans, then it will be, again, the money will not be a problem. So I'm sure that for every country becoming a member of the EU, we will find enough money to support the country. And this is, also one of the strengths of the European Union. We are accompanying our candidates before they enter the EU, but also after. My country, which became a member, Slovenia, of the EU in 2004, we still get more money from Brussels than we pay to Brussels. And there are some other countries who really get a lot of money. Now Hungary will hopefully get more money back, which we withheld in the past. So we will, of course, support. And this is, one of the values I cherish a lot, and I don't see in any other community in the world. It is solidarity. It is in our purpose that we help all the countries, all the regions in the countries to become developed. And if I speak, what makes us, if I may, so different to some other autocrats in the world, our goal is to help countries to be economically developed, to have strong democracies, to become an equal partner to us or inside our family. And for instance, what Putin as an autocrat is doing, he's pushing the countries down. He doesn't want them to be economically strong. He doesn't want them to be democratic. Why? Because otherwise he cannot control them. And I'm so proud that EU is based on solidarity.
Let me ask you as a last question, maybe on, this is part of the reform discussion. We recently had an op-ed by President Vučić of Serbia, Prime Minister Edi Rama of Albania, suggesting their countries could join Schengen and the internal and the single market, for example, at the cost of a membership light, no veto rights. How do you see such sort of proposals and interim arrangements proposed as part of a different accession dynamic?
There is no membership light. You can be a member, then you get all the rights, or you are not a member and you don't get the rights. But of course, I understand this letter from Mr. Vučić and Rama in the sense that if the EU will have problems, to go on with the enlargement process, they would be happy with something less. This is their decision, which I don't support, because my role is to help those countries to become a full member of the EU. The simple rule is there: if a country fulfills all the reforms and criteria, should become a full member of the European Union. This is also how our European treaty is made.
Very last question. When you speak to the member states, because this is these are two sides, right? There's the reform side and the hard work on the part of the candidate countries, but there's also the political will that is necessary on the EU, and especially not so much at the EU level, but at the member state level, from governments and parliaments. Do you see, when you talk to member states, a recognition of this geopolitical and security imperative, and how much is at stake by and large when it comes to enlargement?
Yes, I do. So the security issue is very much expressed the more we go to the north. So Baltic states, some of them have borders to Russia. They are very much afraid if Russia would go after them. So they have a different attitude towards the enlargement. They are very much supportive. On the other hand, there are countries where they have different concerns, not that much in the security issue. But what we know, and I'm traveling all around Europe in the member states, what we have gotten out of the engagement with the member states is they all want us to go on with a merit-based principle, meaning that you can't become a member of the EU if you don't fulfill the criteria, and especially on the rule of law, on the so-called fundamentals, which is rule of law, then anti-corruption, freedom of media, freedom of expression. And I value this a lot. Why? I think we cannot afford to get a new member state who will make us weaker. We are not a bunch of friends. We're a community of values. And once you decide you want to be a part of this community of values and all the benefits, you have to behave, and you have to be a good guy, not a bad guy. Of course, it can be some problems in between, but generally, being a part of the EU, I went through this process in my country. It is not something not important. It is so much important, and it is an honor. So you have to do something to be a good member. We didn't speak about it. We don't speak about this a lot, but I think that we should speak more about this, especially nowadays when we see that, I was telling before, we have been attacked from different corners. We are being accused that our democracy is not a real democracy, that our civilization is in a decline. Gosh, it's really not in a decline. Just look at the elections in Hungary.
I think that's a perfect note to end on. That's all we have time for. Thank you very much for your perspectives, for these updates on the enlargement process and across different candidate countries. And thank you for the personal commitment and the energy and the positivity you bring and how you highlight this very important aspect of Europe's strategic role in all you do. So we wish you every success in your mission here and in your mission more broadly in your portfolio. Thank you, Commissioner Marta Kos.
Thank you so much for what you are contributing to our accession process and better transatlantic relations. We have met in Slovenia for the first time, then in Brussels, now here in Washington, D.C., and it is great. Sometimes if I have 1 minute more, I miss to talk more openly. We also have caught ourselves that in the Enlargement process, we were speaking about benchmarks and clusters and chapters and closing and opening. But it's about the people. It's about how people will benefit from this, so we shouldn't forget it. That's why thank you for enabling me to be part of this and explaining a bit.
Thank you very much for joining us.